As Emily just mentioned, President Trump's latest comments on Iran are sparking new worries in the markets this morning. Let's talk about this with retired Lieutenant General Robert Walsh. He's a former commanding general for the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. He's also on the board of advisors for the investment bank Academy Securities, joining us from our D.C. bureau this morning. And here at the desk, we have our editor-in-chief, Andy Serwer. Good morning to you all. General, I'll start with you. Iraq's parliament has called for the expulsion of all American troops from Iraqi soil. What does that mean for U.S. security in the region now?
Well, Alexis, first, thanks for having me this morning. My pleasure to be with you. I would say what that is this is a non-binding agreement. You would expect the Iraqi government to come out with some type of statement or action to be able to show that they maintain sovereignty in their own country after the strikes that went on. And I would say that what they've done here is by restricting them to the Americans to the bases. They've certainly not kicked them out of the country. They're continuing to train. There's a NATO mission there in the country to continue to train Iraqi forces. And I think it also shows that the Iraqi government realizes that that they still need the American presence there to train their forces.
Andy, futures markets are under pressure again today. We saw that sell-off on Friday on the news. Markets clearly do not like the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of markets 101, which is uncertainty. And no doubt this is uncertainty of the very first strike because you don't know how Iran is going to respond. They say they're going to seek revenge. And so what exactly does that mean, Brian? Does it mean an attack? Does it mean an attack on America? Does it mean an attack on Americans somewhere else around the world? Does it mean disrupting oil supplies? And so all of that serves to impact various types of securities. Stocks under pressure, price of oil goes up, as Emily was talking about, and the price of gold goes up as a safe harbor as well.
General, the New York Times says that killing General Soleimani has been on the table for a long time. Some Democrats now are criticizing the president, questioning the timing of this attack. Some are saying he may have done it now to take away and deflect from the impeachment trial. What are your thoughts on that?
I think my thoughts on that is if you've taken a look at what's gone on with the sanctions, the economic sanctions that have been put on Iran based on the nuclear deal after the U.S. pulled out of that, is the sanctions have been really strangling Iraq and their opportunity to spread money across the Middle East into their proxy forces. And what we saw recently was reports of General Soleimani getting together the Iraqi militia forces in the area to talk about bringing attacks onto the American troop presence in Iraq and a more formal way of doing that, putting a plan together, and also providing weapons to those militia forces. And in doing so, we saw the 11 strikes that have gone on over the last month or so onto Iraqi bases where U.S. forces are. And that has raised the tensions to the point where finally across the red line for the U.S. And the U.S. took actions of striking where those attacks may have been coming from. But the opportunity with Soleimani, who was behind all of this, was the opportunity there to take out the leader and take a step to show Iran that we're serious about this and it will go to the next step beyond just economic sanctions.
General, how likely is it that Iran looks to do some serious damage here via cyber attacks?
I think they have a lot of potential to do that. And that certainly is one. If you had to look at things that the U.S. should be hardening, as you see them hardening bases and outposts across the region, one of the other things that we should be doing right now, and I'm sure we are, is hardening our infrastructure from cyber attacks, because that is one of those areas that does not take us to conventional warfare, but it's one of those things that we've seen Russia do, and certainly Iran has the capability to do, to work below that radar screen, to work in that gray zone area that doesn't take things to major conventional war, but does continue to attack the U.S.
And that's certainly something we need to keep an eye on. And Andy, you're looking at ways that the tensions in the Middle East are already affecting everyday lives.
Yeah, and I mean, just to sort of piggyback on what General Walsh was saying about cyber attacks, you know, the London Stock Exchange was attacked or had a cyber mishap last August. Now they're re-examining that to see if that was in fact a cyber attack and maybe even linked to Iran. But you know, you talk about ordinary lives being affected, Alexis, and obviously our first thoughts go out to the soldiers being deployed from Fort Bragg. and the families. So those people obviously are impacted right away. But here in New York City, for instance, the security alerts went out. Certain public places, there are more security. I know the Chinese consulate here in the United States sent out, in New York, sent out warnings to its citizens living here, and people are concerned about taking the subway. Also, say, for instance, we've learned that the U.S. national soccer team, which was going to go to Qatar to begin practice, that trip has been canceled or postponed. So, you know, in these small ways, Americans are feeling this. And I think that if you ask President Trump about it, he would say, well, this is a trade-off worth making. And of course, that remains to be seen. Also, another thing to note is, of course, traveling overseas, which is always something to be very much aware of when you're making plans like that.
General, do you think this is a trade-off that President Trump had to make?
I do. I think if you look at what he had been doing, he had been using the economic sanctions to try to put the pressure on Iran to really, at the broader context of not trying to conduct the type of terrorist operations they had been conducting across the Middle East. So yes, he wanted the nuclear weapons reduced, but he also, in a larger interest, protect U.S. interests, which are people, property, our partners, oil flowing through the region. And as you looked at that, when the attacks took place from Iran, as they tried to ratchet this up, you know, over the last several months, with the attacks on the oil tankers, the attacks on the Saudi oil fields, and then certainly the one where they took down the U.S. drone. And when they took that down, there was a lot of people, both on the left and on the right, looked at that and said, well, President Reagan would have attacked. He didn't. He held back and said, we're going to look at the economic sanctions. They're working. And as long as you don't take any American lives, we're going to continue to press in this maximum pressure campaign by focusing on economic sanctions. When this took an American contractor's life and wounded 4 of our service members, that crossed that line. And I think that's when he crossed that line and made the decision to go ahead and attack Major General Soleimani, and also the attack on the Kataib Hezbollah Iraqi militia groups. Yep. And a lot of that also came as a result of the attack on our U.S. embassy.
We'll have to leave it there. Retired Lieutenant General Robert Walsh and Andy Serwer, thank you.
Thanks.